Thank you, Chris. So hello, everyone, and welcome. As Chris said, my name is Alex Carter, and for about a decade now, I've been coaching introverted and quiet folks who want to be effective and authentic in their leadership. Because in our noisy, soundbite-oriented society, it can feel impossible for quiet folks to cut through the auditory clutter and to make themselves heard. So today I want to offer some perspective and some strategies to help you make yourself heard authentically without losing yourself or your sanity. So I first want to make sure that we're all clear on what introverts are, who they are, difficult for them to speak up effectively. Introverts are people who need time alone to recharge, and they usually need time to sort out their thoughts before they speak. This is because, as we're learning from neuroscience, introverts often experience difficulty with word retrieval or finding exactly the right word, that sort of tip of the tongue phenomenon. There are a couple of factors that contribute to this, but suffice it to say for now that the introvert brain is physically different from the extrovert brain. So that's all the neuroscience we're going to do today. It gets easier from here. And there are different types of introverts. If anyone is familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, there are about 8 different kinds of introverts. Some are shy, but not all. Some have social anxiety, but not all. But they all share this need to take time alone to restore their energy, and they tend to share this difficulty kind of collecting their thoughts on the fly. For all introverts, things like crowds, open floor plans, and social events can be draining. Don't get me wrong, though, most introverts do like people and they do go out. It's just that socializing can be stressful and we need quiet time afterward to recharge. I do identify very strongly as an introvert. And being an introvert is not a character flaw. It's not something that needs to be fixed. It's a characteristic like the color of your eyes or whether you're left or right-handed. And it doesn't mean that introverts can't be effective leaders and communicators. So just to give you an idea, some famous introverts, Rosa Parks. She's perhaps most famous for what she didn't do. She didn't give up her seat on the bus to a white person. Mohandas Gandhi. He led human rights efforts in South Africa before he became the face of the Indian independence movement in the 1940s. He spent a huge amount of time alone, frequently in spiritual retreats. But while he was relatively quiet, he could be effective and eloquent as a speaker and ultimately inspired a nation, one of the largest nations in the world, to win independence from Great Britain. Steve Jobs, the visionary founder of Apple. He's a quiet person, he's a self-defined introvert, but think about his presentations when he would introduce new products, his communications. They're now the stuff of legend. People try to copy them. He would stand alone on the stage wearing his trademark jeans and black mock turtleneck and glasses. And he may have spoken softly, but he communicated extremely effectively, and what he had to say really changed our world. This is Warren Buffett, known as the Oracle of Omaha. He's perhaps the most famous and successful investor of all time. He probably owns pieces of or all of companies you encounter every day with their products and services. He has often said that he needs that time alone to recharge and take space and to think carefully about his deal making. And his infrequent and terse comments are watched carefully by markets all over the world. And finally, for today, we have Barack Obama, whom I called the introvert in chief for 8 years. The op-ed columnist David Brooks said, being led by Barack Obama is like being trumpeted into battle by Miles Davis. He makes you want to sit down and discern. I think Brooks, in the context of his article, meant this as a criticism, as a negative, that Obama wasn't dynamic or forceful enough in trying to promote his agenda. But I see this statement as an acknowledgement of the very strong differences that introverts bring to leadership. Obama could be eloquent and even fiery, but that was not his default mode of communication. So I've been talking about introverts, and introverts are not the only folks who are quiet communicators, but I'll probably use introverts a lot in this, and I'll also use quiet people interchangeably in the rest of the presentation. So, leadership. Leadership is about getting other people to buy into your perspective and to follow you. Whether you're heading up a project in your company or running for office or something in between, leaders need to get people inspired and excited about their vision and willing to go along with them. And leadership, therefore, requires effective communication. I mean, know if you can't articulate where you want to go. You need to make some kind of connection. But I would argue that we buy into a lot of cultural myths about what it means to communicate like a leader. So I love that this slide at the bottom says concept of leadership. So it's a concept of leadership. It might not be the reality. And for introverts in particular and quiet folks, it is not the reality. That we have stereotypes about what leaders are, who they are. They have charisma. They seem to make decisions quickly and confidently. They're dynamic. They get up there on the top of the mountain and wave the flag and rally the troops. And as a quiet person, you might think to yourself, this is so not me. If that's what I have to do and that's who I have to be in order to be a leader, you might say to yourself, there is no way, no mine, not going to happen, I'm not going to do it. I'll just sit here, I'll file my TPS reports, I'll keep my head down, and that's it. Well, that's a loss to you because you don't get to use your talents. It's a loss to your company because they don't get to have the benefit of your talents, and it's a loss to the world in that way. Or perhaps you say, okay, well, if that's what it takes to be a leader, I'll do that. I'll be that way. So you try to be high energy, to project confidence and speak quite quickly and firmly and put your hands on your hips in the Superman pose. But that's not the real. And you start to feel like an imposter. And worse, you can't seem to connect because people feel that you feel like an imposter. They get it. And you come home at the end of the day totally exhausted from trying to fake it. And you're not alone. I've seen many introverts abandon their innate strengths in an effort to look and sound like this kind of leader. So I want you to think about this. There is zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. Susan Cain wrote the book Quiet about 10 years ago. It is sort of the book about introverts and their strengths and the contributions that they can make to society and to organizations and to their families and to other people. Seth Godin, you may know, is an internet marketing guru, and he says, the less people know, the more they yell. So there isn't, one does not have to be this stereotypical, dynamic, loud, confident leader in order to lead effectively. And I think some of the examples that I gave earlier also demonstrate that. So let me offer a different perspective on leadership. Leadership is about empowering people and helping them reach their goals. It's about inspiring people to buy into a shared vision, and so you can lead either continuity or change. It doesn't have to be change. But this is particularly true when we're talking about leadership in the workplace. In fact, your job as a workplace leader is to help your reports succeed. And that's often a stumbling block for folks who become new leaders in organizations because up until that point, your job has been to do your job really well and to succeed in your job. But when you become a leader, your job is to help other people succeed in their jobs. And if people feel that you as a leader understand them and care about them, they will follow you anywhere. Feeling heard, feeling understood, feeling cared about is a basic human need, and people will respond to having that need met. And I will say that introverts are really good at this. They are good at connecting to people. So they lead, but not in the way that the stereotype says. So I'm here to tell you today that you can communicate and lead differently and effectively, and it'll change your work for the better, and it'll change your life for the better. When you're authentic, it's going to work. And everyone will know you're being authentic, and people will respond to that. In this sort of prefab society with people getting out there and doing the yada yada, when you are being you, people know it and they respond to it. So I know this because I've helped a lot of quiet people over the last decade or so make this happen for them. I've also made it happen for me. So I want to tell you a little bit about that, so maybe you'll have something you can relate to. So at one point in my career, this goes back maybe 15 years or so, I was tapped for a leadership position. And the position involved being out in the world, talking about my organization and its mission, and forming partnerships, and basically being the face of my organization. And I thought, there has been a huge mistake. As I said before, I identify strongly as an introvert. I would carry a card if there was one. I need a lot of downtime to recharge. I tend not to speak immediately in meetings because my thoughts, again, take a little bit longer to pull together. But you know that feeling in meetings, like 15 minutes after it's over, you have the perfect thought that jumps into your head, fully formed? That was me. I thought, how can I do this? How can I be proactive in this way? I don't feel all that easy with people usually. And I thought, for sure, I can't do this. This is not going to work. I took that path of, maybe if I keep my head down and do my TPS reports, I'll be fine. But my organization apparently saw something in me that I didn't see. And so I sort of took up the challenge and tried to figure out what it takes to do this job. And I began working with a coach. And in the process of working with a coach, I learned what my introvert strengths are. And I learned how to approach communication and leadership in a way that was authentic and effective for me. And I still use those skills. And many of them are in the part of this talk that's to follow. So let's see how introverts can be effective leaders because of, not despite, their different communication approaches. I want to remind you, zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. And yes, the less people know, the more they yell. Remember, the volume of your communication, how loud you say it, doesn't equal quality of communication. And the quantity of your communication, the amount you talk, does not equal quality either. So many quiet folks prefer one-to-one conversation to speaking in a group or to a group. And I call one-on-one conversation an introvert superpower. It's not just a strength, it's a downright superpower. And it is comprised of three things. First, deep listening. And when I say deep listening, it's listening to understand both what the other person is saying and what they're not saying and how they're saying it. It's not listening merely to respond. It's not that half listening while you take a minute and you say, okay, I can respond to this by saying this, or here's my counter argument to that. It's you listening to the person, their perspective, their needs, both spoken and unspoken. And again, that need to feel heard and understood is a core human need. The second piece is thinking before you speak. This is what introverts do. I was talking with friends last night, a married couple. She's an extrovert, he's an introvert. She was all on his case about how he hadn't sent a message to their local representative about an issue that was happening in their town. And he said, well, I need to think about it a little bit more. She's like, what to think about? You just write it down, you send it, it's an email, it goes on the pile, the guy gets the email, he knows how many people think this way. He's like, no, I have to think, And he, as she put it, he eventually wrote this beautiful, well-reasoned, very wonderful argument for his point of view and sent it off. But he couldn't just whip it off. He needed to think before he spoke. And once he was able to do that, the third piece is having direct conversations. Once you've formulated your opinion and your response, you can speak honestly and directly to the person. Now, there is something of a stereotype of some introverts that they're a little brusque, perhaps, and perhaps too direct, but that's something you could work with if you're interested in improving your communication. But having heard and learned, you're ready to respond. And it may be that if you're in a leadership position and you're talking to one of your reports, say, that you need to have a conversation in two parts. The first part is where you listen deeply and understand what is happening with this person. And the second is to be able to gather your thoughts and then have another conversation where you share those thoughts. But talking one-on-one with your reports and listening to understand is a gold-plated way for introverts to communicate and lead. As I said before, if people feel cared about, they will follow you. So this is the best way for introverts to be communicating and leading. But often we are required to speak in a group or to a group, and that in a meeting or at a conference or at a networking event, God forbid. And these are cringe-inducing scenarios for introverts. In fact, there are surveys that show that most people, I mean, extroverts as well as introverts, are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. I mean, think about that for a second. They're more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. So I want to list and discuss a few strategies for surviving and even thriving in group events. And I'm going to focus on meetings and conferences and networking, since my experience with clients is that these are situations and they are extremely stressful, and they really work against introverts being able to speak up and be heard. But the main point to all the strategies I'm going to present are two. First, to make as many one-to-many conversations into one-to-one conversations, so that you're able to deploy those superpowers in your one-to-one conversations. Second, the goal is to honor your energy and your thought processes, to honor the fact that you need time to recharge, and to honor the fact that sometimes it's difficult for you to come up with a thought immediately. So those are our two gold star goals for what I'm going to share, so that you can be authentically you and that your thoughts and your ideas can shine through. So you may have heard the phrase meeting hell. You may say it a lot yourself, depending on what happens in your organization. Now, some people refer this as having back-to-back-to-back meetings. I'm in meeting hell this afternoon. I'll talk to you later. For introverts, meeting hell is a meeting, just any meeting. So, and all of these thoughts can run through an introvert's head. So how do you deal with a meeting? Meetings are a fact of organizational life. Some meetings are great, most meetings not so much. So how do you improve a meeting scenario so that you can be more effective? First, prepare. Preparation, preparation, preparation. Think about the topic or the topics to be covered. Write down your thoughts. I mean, introverts often are excellent writers and usually find that it can help clarify by helping with word retrieval, by giving you time to think. It also can help you not only clarify what you think, but discover what you think. One client of mine who's an executive director started a practice of writing about her work every day, in addition to the private journaling that she did. And she discovered how she felt about things. It gave her time to process. And then, once you've prepared, you prepare some more. Most introverts, by a quote objective manner, because I don't know that there's an objective way to think about this, most introverts over prepare. I mean, the way that shows up is often they'll have too much material for the time available, but most introverts prepare a lot, and so this is fairly easy. But you need to do that and take that time. It can prevent, or at least reduce, the odds of getting totally nervous and drowning in flop sweat and stuttering and stammering. I always practice my speeches and talks or presentations like this one. My dog is a fantastic listener, not a great critic, but a really great listener. So strategy number 2 is amplification. I read about this strategy and it being called that in an article last year about female advisors in the Obama White House. There were a good number of them, but fewer of them in the second term. And they found it very difficult to break through and have their ideas heard in male-dominated meetings. Or if they had their ideas heard, sometimes someone else would co-opt their idea and not give them credit for it. So the strategy here is to work together. They came together as a group and said, okay, I want to propose this idea, and someone else would say, okay, I'll propose this. And what they did was at the meeting, someone would make their proposal, and if it seemed to be getting lost, someone else would speak up and say, hey, I really like Anne's proposal. I think that's something we should talk about or do. And they made sure it got heard, and they made sure that the person who proposed it got credit for it. So this is something I've been suggesting to clients, but now I call it amplification. And here's how it works for introverts. You have friends in the office, or you have colleagues in the office that you trust reasonably well. If you're feeling shaky about your presentation or your talking points, and especially if you think it's going to show, but even if you don't think it's going to show, ask someone to amplify for you. say, it would really be great if when I make this point, if at some point in this discussion, if it gets lost or whatever, if you could amplify it for me and say that you'd like to have it discussed more. It's kind of like having a plant in the audience. And especially if you're not speaking confidently that day, someone else who speaks more confidently could amplify your point. So ask for, it's really a specific way of asking for help. Strategy number 3, buy time. So let other folks in the meeting know that you need a moment to think. And sometimes, you don't need an hour necessarily, but you just need a minute. So my clients use phrases like, just give me a second, I want to be very clear about what I'm going to say. Or they'll say, let me have a moment to think this through. Okay. I have Mark Twain up here because there's a story about him where he said, whenever I get an invitation that I don't want to accept, I start my answer by saying, oh, I'd love to, but. And in the space of those 5 words, I can think of a reason not to go. I can think of an excuse to get out of the event. He's buying time in his typical classic Mark Twain way. Most meetings are not so crucial that you can't take a minute or two to think about it. And don't let other people's pace dictate your pace. Honor the time that you need, the energy that you have, and fight for it if you have to. Don't let other people's pace dictate your pace. Strategy 4, build in breaks. Anybody with kids knows sometimes we just need a timeout. But for business, it's hard to say I need a timeout. But one thing is to make sure that you don't have back-to-back-to-back meetings, if at all possible, because it will drain you completely. And by the end of the day, you'll barely be able to pour yourself into your car to go home. One way to do this is say, look, I'm hearing some really good points. I have some thoughts brewing, and I'd like to come back to this a bit later, whether it's in that meeting or maybe in email, which you can then write to folks after the meeting has concluded. It may feel weird at first to say, look, I need a little more time, so I will get back to you, at a point. It may feel weird and people may look at you funny, but really, ultimately, people will appreciate that you provide thoughtful responses and thoughtful input. Again, don't let other people's pace dictate your pace. Strategy number 5, if it's at all possible, set boundaries around how many meetings you will attend. It may be that if you're providing value to the folks around you in these meetings and your ideas are good and your work is in general is good, you can get excused from unnecessary meetings. If you have a little flexibility in your schedule, maybe you can say, look, I don't think I have, rather than saying, I don't think I need to be in this meeting, which is kind of putting yourself down, you could say something like, I feel like I don't have anything to contribute to this meeting and perhaps I should just, stay out. That's one way to handle it. I'm to a point in my career where I can say, if your meeting does not have an agenda in advance, your meeting will not have me at it. One of the things I have learned is that if organizers of a meeting can't put themselves together enough to put together a reasonable agenda with what they want to talk about and what they want to accomplish, then that meeting will be a waste of my time. And I like to honor my need for recharging time, and I encourage you to honor that need and set boundaries wherever possible, recognizing that not everyone at a certain point in their career may be able to do that. 6th option is to try to change the structure of the meeting or the format of the meeting. So somebody says, oh, let's have a brainstorming session. We'll all get together, in a room and we'll talk. Well, you could suggest, well, maybe we should do it sort of in an online forum, or maybe we could all commit to brainstorming this afternoon and coming back tomorrow morning with our thoughts. This gives you time to think before you speak. That honors your process. And if you're nervous about suggesting this, say, hey, there's science behind it. It turns out that brainstorming sessions, classic brainstorming sessions where everybody sits around and, throws a ball against the wall and perseverates and people try to come up with ideas, they're very bad at generating ideas and generating good ideas, both generating a number of ideas and generating good ideas. for a bunch of reasons you can probably think about. Quiet people don't get heard because they're not able to formulate ideas that quickly. The loudest person's idea generally wins, irrespective of how good they are, because they're yelling. And often the group will come to some kind of agreement or closure on an idea too soon, and because not everything's getting heard. In the early days of Apple computing, they had this sort of asynchronous brainstorming where everybody had their own office, all the engineers and things had their own office, and twice a day, the donut cart would come around. And so there'd be donuts or pastries or whatever and coffee, and everybody would step out of their offices and into the hall. And during that time, they exchanged a lot of information and told each other what they were thinking about, and they'd spark off of each other, and then everybody would go back into their office and do their work. I mean, to me, that's like introvert heaven. But it's science. Finally, in terms of conferences and meetings, in terms of strategies, lobby for getting the agenda in advance. I've done that. So this is for standard everyday meetings. So then there's the things that people really hate, or introverts really hate, which are the conferences and the networking events, because they seem to be all about small talk, especially networking events that people, as you think about them, they're about small talk. Introverts want to have substantive conversations. They want to engage their brains and think deeply about things. And network events for introverts and quiet people, fate's worse than death. And again, the strategies that I'm about to offer are about focusing, turning your one-to-many situations into one-on-one, and honoring your energy and your thought processes, okay? So the first thing I would say is before you go to, and you can use this in your everyday, it's a little easier, but if you're going into a big event with a lot of people, please don't forget to breathe. Your brain needs the oxygen. And a friend of mine pointed out to me, you need to both breathe in and breathe out, or else it doesn't work. So just remember to breathe. One of the things, one of the things I say the most to my clients is remember to breathe, okay? So how can you turn one-to-many into one-to-one and honor your thought processes? First, set a target. Be strategic. Keep your expectations modest, especially when you're new at networking events or conference events. And the thing about conferences is a lot of this stuff happens in between sessions. So you're standing around and people are like chatting away, and you have 15 minutes in your next session and you don't know what to do. So set limits or goals. The goal of a networking event or a conference is not to collect the largest number of business cards. Trust me, there's no prize. You don't come back to, and the more you have when you get back to your office, the more you have to try to remember who that guy was or what she said about this and why did I get this person's card. The goal of conferences and networking is to make real connections with people in your field and to be remembered in a good way, okay? To make real connections and so that people remember you in a good way. So to be strategic or set a target, first of all, think about in this event, this conference, for example, is there someone or someones that I want to make a connection with? Either they are, big people in your field whose work you admire, or people at the company you want to work for next. Find out if you're able to, in advance, who they are and who you want to meet. Or just set a target to make it a game. Say, okay, I'm going to talk and make connections with and get business cards from 2 people. So once you've set those goals, either to meet specific people or to meet 2 people or 3 people, after you've met your goal, you're free to go. If it's a networking event, go home. You've done it. There is no, as I said, since there's no prize for numbers, it's not quantity, it's quality. Second, okay, so you say, I'm going to try to meet people. What do? Ask open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. They move you into one-on-one conversations. So imagine you're standing next to another quiet person, both of you kind of fidgeting nervously, and you ask, is this your first conference? And the other person says, no. Or the other person says, yes. And then the awkward silence continues with both of you standing there. So try instead something like, what do you hope to get out of today's talk? It's an open-ended question. And what it does, it also sneakily takes the focus off of you and puts it on the other person so that you can relax and listen. So other open-ended questions, one of them is, what do you hope to get at today's talk? Or are you working on anything exciting lately? Or what's been the highlight of your week? One of my favorite questions to ask is, what do you do when you're not at events like this? Some people will talk about their work. Some people will talk about their hobbies or their families. It's a wonderful question. I learn about people. A third strategy, which you have to be a little, I think, confident to do, and that's okay. You can pretend it's a party and you're the host. I know the introverts are saying, I never have parties. Fine. But pretend it's a party and pretend you're the host. And the reason I say this is because it's the host's job to make everybody comfortable and make sure they're having a good time. Just like it's a leader's job to make sure that their reports are succeeding. Okay? So find someone who looks as uncomfortable as you feel. You'll be able to spot them as you're standing at the side of the edge of the room. Also be standing or sitting at the side or the edge of the room, and go up and say, hello, and I'm Alex, and so what are you hoping to get out of today's talk? Again, they will be grateful to you for rescuing them from their discomfort. They'll talk, the focus is off of you. They might ask you an open-ended question, and before you know it, you're getting along and learning a bunch of stuff. So after this event, if you've had a good conversation with someone and you've gotten their contact information, it's not about how many cards you get, but do get cards. Or you can just get their email and then you can email them, whatever people are using these days. I still use business cards. But it's really nice to, and again, with the goal of making a connection and being remembered in a positive way, send an email the next day and say, it was lovely to meet you, and so did you get what you hoped to get out of the conversation? And again, you can't do this if you're looking to spray and pray about collecting business cards or collecting information, because you'll have gone to too many people. But if you've talked to 2 or 3 people, you can remember that Anne said that she was really hoping to meet the presenter after because he's a friend of her father's. So you can say, Anne, it was lovely to meet you last night. I really hope you got a chance to meet with the presenter. And I hope what I often end with is something vague like, I hope our paths cross again soon. If there's more that you want to do to follow up, then go through. That's your opportunity to say, you mentioned Blob. You're at a company that I'm interested in working for. I wonder, and then start your pitch about if you're looking for a job or whatever it is. So this notion of following through the next day, a client of mine just recently, just like last week, said to me, and introverts will love this, isn't that stalking? No, it's not stalking. It's networking. It's making connections, and it's meeting people in a way that they will follow your agenda, whether your agenda is to get a new job or to increase your learning in your field or to get the project that you're working on moving forward. The polite note that refers to your conversation reinforces that connection and reminds the person that, that's the person who asked that interesting question. And again, finally, make sure that you have time and a way to recharge and decompress after an event. I frequently drive to events alone and drive home alone because then I can have silence or comforting music, or I can just make complete gibberish noises to get the stress out. Whatever it is that you need to do. If or take time when you get home and say, nobody talks to me for 10 minutes while I go and have, a glass of wine. So I hope that these are strategies that you will find useful. But the main point here is to try to turn one-to-many situations into one-to-one situations so that you can shine in a one-to-one situation, and honor your energy and your thought processes. That will give you the confidence. That will give you the confidence to have those one-to-one conversations. They feed off of each other. So I've offered a few of the most effective strategies my clients use. And before we go to the Q&A, I'd just like to ask you, what strategies that I've reviewed speak to you? What have you used? Have you used any of them, and how have they worked out? Is there anything that you learned today that will help, that you think will help you in your next situation? And where do you think you need support and more specific strategies and practice and preparation? So before we go to the Q&A, I would like to offer you a gift for being here. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your interest. Sometimes I get funny looks when I tell people I coach introverts, although a lot of people are really interested. I have a small monograph that's called 3 Myths About Leadership That Introverts Shouldn't Buy Into. Flip the script and embrace your strengths. And it talks about specific introvert strengths and communication strategies. And if you go to my website, which is www.alexcarter.com/terps, there will be a place where you can sign up for that, and it will be delivered to your mailbox. And it's completely free, no obligation or anything else. Since I get your email, you will also get a message that that confirms that you actually want to receive the item. I do have a mailing list that I send infrequent, I hope not obnoxious, communication to, so as not to clutter your inbox and to have you feel, if you're a quiet person, that I am yelling at you, because I wouldn't want that. But now it's time for questions.
Thank you, Alex. As Alex mentioned, we'll go ahead and take some time for questions now. And just a friendly reminder to please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. And as those questions come in, Alex will address them one at a time. So go ahead and type your questions in now, please. Thank you.
Oh, here's a great question. Can you be a type A personality and be an introvert? Kathleen, you are listening to one right now. Because being an introvert really has to do with two things. It has mostly to do with how you get your energy. And you get your energy by taking time to yourself. And let me just explain my understanding of a type A personality is that a type A personality is fairly intense and can be something of a control freak in a negative way, wants to make sure that things are in order, is generally pretty organized. And yes, because wanting things to be in order and being committed to that doesn't have much to do with where you get your energy. It helps if you manage your energy so that you can support yourself as you go through trying to be sort of in charge of things. But yes, absolutely, you can be a type A. Any tips for introverts managing extroverts? Mike, I feel you. So one thing that I try to do, and one of the things, excuse me, one of the things I think it's important is for people to acknowledge that not everybody is the same, and that there are people who are introverts and extroverts, and there are people who can speak quickly and off the cuff, and then there are people who need a little more time. So I guess one of the things, Mike, I'd want to know is what managing is for you. What it means, whether it's trying to communicate with them or having them, having them change their behavior in some way. Because again, it's all about managing energy. So in a situation where you are supervising or have an extrovert as a report, it's important that they understand that you don't communicate the same way necessarily, and that you do need time. If you're finding something obnoxious about them, then that's kind of another question. But if you providing feedback, supervising on a project, okay. So that's a one-to-one situation where you're providing feedback. So as a coach, I encourage managers to ask questions about what they're, first of all, to state what they're seeing, that they want to provide feedback. So, Edgar, extrovert, I noticed that there's this. I noticed that when you, sometimes in meetings, people feel a little hesitant to respond to you, okay? What do you think that's about? So that gives you the opportunity to, to exercise your introvert strength of listening to that person, okay? and again, when there are supervising issues that come up. So I try to start with an observation and a question. And then you can hear from your extrovert, Edgar the extrovert, about what's going on for them. And then you are able to generate your response by letting them know perhaps that, okay, I'm hearing this is really interesting to me, but I need just a second, or I need until tomorrow to really think about it and be able to give you some feedback about it. And again, don't let somebody else's pace or somebody else's style dictate your style. So I'm looking at some other. Okay, right. Annie being scared to speak up for intro level employees. Yes, I would advocate strongly for looking at the agenda. If the agenda doesn't go out in advance, then yeah, there's nothing you can do about it except review it when you get there, and think about what is happening in the meeting, what the topics are, if there's a need for any decisions. I would encourage amplification. I would encourage you trying to find other folks who may be at your level or above your level, if you are on good terms with them, to find ways to make your voice heard, even if it's hard for you to speak up. And to know that even as an intro level employee, your employer found something valuable in you, and they're paying you for what you can do and what you can contribute. And try to have that in your back pocket as a confidence builder. And if you're, in general, if people have difficulty with public speaking or speaking up, there's still Toastmasters. They've been around forever and they're awesome. Practicing breaking into a conversation with supportive friends, getting a coach, and trying to build your skills in this way. But in the immediate term, I would try amplification. How to handle disappointment after an unsuccessful networking event, Jerry. I think part of that is by framing your expectations appropriately at the beginning. I'm going to identify a person that I want to talk to, or I'm going to talk to two people and then leave. If you are able to square your expectations and set them in a way that is comfortable for you, I wouldn't say don't stretch. I think stretching is a good thing. But remind yourself that you did get out there. You walked in the door, you attempted to make conversation, perhaps someone wasn't responsive, but so that your goals are proportionate. A goal going into a network event shouldn't be, I'm going to make such an impression that people will be, that the person that I speak to for 2 minutes is going to want to offer me a job. That's like going up and say, hi, I'm Alex. You look cute, let's get married. So you want to understand that networking events where, for example, you're looking for a job, and I'm assuming that that's part of what's behind your question, is the beginning of a relationship, and that there needs to be follow through. So I think if you try to calibrate your expectations accordingly, it's a little harder to be disappointed, but also to say, I tried. And yeah, it's not all about E for effort, but at the same time, recognizing that it is difficult for you to step out and put yourself out that way. And the fact that it did not work out exactly the way you might have hoped doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do, or that it won't work next time. Practice, practice, practice. Yes, Lamaya, how do you make the case to people when honoring your needs? That is a tough one. It's first of all, it's hard to speak up at the beginning, right? Just off the block to say I need this. And it's hard, I think, also especially for women in this culture, to set boundaries at all. I mean, this whole conversation that we're having now as a country about inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace is about boundaries and about saying no or saying not that way. And perhaps some of it is, first of all, educating your friends, like if you can't go to an event, finding the paradox of finding other introverts who get you, or even to say, look, I can't be a good friend to you. If I go to this event with you, I'm going to be cranky. I mean, I am going to just, I'm going to be like a baby who needs a nap. I think friends who are real friends will try to understand that, even if it's not something that they share. And it may be that you can turn the tables on them a little and say, well, what would it be for you if you couldn't speak for 5 minutes when I ask you a question? You had to think about it, and how stressful that would be to you. So I would not apologize for being an introvert. I think sometimes the dominant culture says maybe we should apologize and try to change. Nobody ever says, hey, let's make all the extroverts, think for 5 minutes before they speak. That'll fix it. Okay. So own your characteristic, own your reality, and know that it's okay. It's not a character flaw. My supervisor is recommending Toastmasters when I'm terrified of public speaking. Yes, okay. Go anyway. Or start with friends whom you know. Start with people you trust. In your living room, and do your speech to your cat. Do your speech to your friend. Get feedback. Practice, practice, practice. Okay. If I don't have much to say, okay, yeah. So what do you do if you simply don't feel like you have much to say at a meeting? That's okay. If the facilitator is a good one, they'll go around and make sure that quiet people have a chance to be heard. And I will frequently say, there's nothing that I could say that hasn't already been said, which people will hear, oh, thank God she's not going to just go on to hear her voice, right? So, if someone points out to you, would you like, I'm sorry, was this Ruth? I'm trying to see. Yeah, Ruth. Try not to be uncomfortable. If your organization sort of seems to place a value on participation, you might be able to take that up with your supervisor and say, sometimes there are just things I don't have anything to add. And see if you can come to an understanding with that person, and the rest of the people are just going to have to adjust. It is difficult to honor being an introvert in today's business environment, Jerry. Thank you. It is always difficult to be something or to have a characteristic that is not the dominant and that is not necessarily valued. But I hope that some of the strategies that we've talked about today will help you to feel that you can at least be more participating and not feel left out in your organization or in your environment, and so that you will be so that your quietness won't be misinterpreted. So I would go again for quality of communication over quantity of communication. Okay, the link to the book isn't working. Try clicking twice. Give that a so. How does it overcome being an introvert in a hostile meeting environment, for example, when you know that your ideas will be critiqued? So you don't want to overcome being an introvert in that situation, but I think that it is difficult to accept negative commentary about one's work. If it's about your work, it's at least easier than if it's about you personally. And I would hope, certainly in your case, that people are going to be talking about your work or your ideas and not you personally. It is important to practice being open to negative feedback, because it will come whether your environment as a whole is hostile or not. And so listening deeply to the comments and trying to find the content behind the dressing to see if there is validity in what someone is saying. They may not be saying it in a way that is as comfortable for you, but there is likely to be a grain of truth or a grain of an idea in it. I always try to thank people for their feedback before I respond. It helps me get in the right mood for responding to negative feedback, to say thank you or I appreciate your feedback, because feedback helps us get better. But it can feel very intimidating. I respect that. But it's not necessarily overcoming being an introvert. And it may be that you have to say, I've heard a lot of really strong feedback today, but I'm really not able. Okay, thank you, Annie. I will work on the website. But I'm not able to respond because there's been a lot of stuff I really need to chew over. And if you've and so that is your truth. And if people demand a response at the moment, thank you, thank you, Annie. If people demand a response in the moment, you're not going to be able to give it to them. And to be able to say, I can't respond in the moment what I would say, because I don't have my thoughts together, and it wouldn't be a good use of our time. Saving people their time and valuing people's time is a strategy that you can always use. Okay, let me see. Okay. I'm not seeing any new questions. If there's anything else folks would like to check in about or ask a question about before I go off and fix my website, I would be happy to hear them. Okay, Chris, we may be at an ending point.
Okay.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. Any strategies for getting blowhards to stop talking? Oh my God. I feel your pain, Mike. What can I say? If you are not the blowhards supervisor and can offer them some feedback, it can be very difficult. If you are running the meeting, that's your job. If you're not running the meeting, then you might be able to talk to the person who runs that meeting to say, look, it's really hard for me and for some other people to get our thoughts in. I wonder if you would, consider maybe some strategies for, having the meeting go a little bit differently so that everybody can contribute. That's off the top of my head and without any time to think about a response. I would say that's the first thing that comes to my mind. But I'm sure that after I get off the phone and fix my website, I will have other thoughts. So if you would like to shoot me another question or comment along the way, please do. My email is coach@alexcarter.com. So coach@alexcarter.com. Please feel free. Speaking of which, let me yeah, there you go. So this is how to get in touch with me. I am on LinkedIn and Facebook, and there are my connection daters. Thank you for the person who asked about how to get in touch. It was not a plant, it was a genuine call or a genuine question. So thank you.
Well, great. Thank you, Alex, again for presenting today. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I want to thank Chris and the University of Maryland Alumni Association for giving me this space today. And I want to thank all of you for your time and attention. So have fun storming the castle in your quiet, introvert, powerful one-on-one way.
Great. And to echo Alex, thank you to everyone who was able to join us today. If you would like a copy of the slides from today's presentation, please contact Alex directly. And we hope you will join us for a future webinar. Our next one, Preparing Your Online Presence for Your Job Search, is on Wednesday, January 17th at noon Eastern. Have a wonderful day and go Terps.